Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today by Mr. George Nelson, who is in sales and logistics for Cooper Marine and Timberlands out in Mobile, Alabama. There's quite a few generations of history to cover, so we will get right into it. George, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Glad we could make this work here finally. Um, Tell me, I guess, start as far back as you can. I think you said your great-grandfather was running paddle wheelers back in the day.
He was back then they were pushing logs down the river from Birmingham to Mobile. That's what the uncles and dad and everyone has told me. So it started out with paddle wheel boats and logs. Then my grandfather, he had a wooden model bow tug, and they did everything on the tow line. And that's where my dad got his first start. So the stories go, he was 2 years old, and Grandpa would make Grandma ride the boat so that Dad would be on the boat. Um, Dad spent his entire life riding boats, from wooden model bow boats up to the Robert N. Stout, which now is the PB Shaw. Um, One of some of my most favorite times is when Dad will share some of his river stories. He says that he went from the little wooden model bow to the bigger tows and the steel boats, and he saw a picture of the Mark Easton. Couldn't wait to get on it. Couldn't wait to see it until he actually got on the boat, and it was a boat. They used it for work. It wasn't something that you put in a magazine to display the marine industry. And back then, those men worked. Um, he tells the story that his first tow, he turned from one side to the other, and the tow just kept going. And he thought, how in the world am I going to do this? But that's all he ever dreamed of, was doing heavy tows on the lower Mississippi River. Um, Dad actually worked his way up. I think his biggest tow was 50 barges. He had 49, and he called his dispatcher, says, look, I got 49. Let's make it an even 50. So she found him a deck barge and put in tow, and he headed northbound. So my dad has been my mentor from day one. And even until this day, I'll go to Dad when I have a question. And he's a wealth of knowledge and information that you just don't find these days. Um, then I came along, I think I was 3 years old, and the C&D had just come out. So Dad and I took off on the C&D after she was built. He says I was his deckhand. We went up to Berry Steam Plant, put the rigging on the boat, and from there, all of my upbringing has been nothing but boats and barges. My alphabet was learned from WGN, PTC, ING, looking over Dad's shoulder. What is that? Well, what is this? Most kids would go from they go camping in the woods. I went to McDuffie Coal Terminal, and we'd spend the night on the boat beating and banging. He didn't get any sleep, but I'm sitting there looking through the porthole and seeing the barges beat up against the boat. And we get up the next morning, I'd take a shower and put my little uniform on, and he'd take me to school, and then he'd go to work. And then fast forward, I'm growing up. I'm turned 16. He handed me a set of keys and a pager. Said, don't be late to work. So I'd go to work before school, go to school. I get out of work. Back then, we used typewriters. We used the VHF radio. He had one in his truck, one at the house. And then I just kept going forward with everything. I did crewing. I did maintenance. I rode on the boats. Very limited. But I was the fill-in deckhand when nobody else would show up. I feel very blessed and fortunate, because as the marine industry went from the typewriter and the beeper and the fax to the telephone, cell phone, and internet that we have today, I feel like I was there for that evolution right as it was happening. And I was blessed to be a part of some technological companies that were able to help me and teach me and learn on the go. And I feel like I have done every aspect and facet through my dad's company that all of the big major companies do. They do it on a bigger scale, and I got to do it on a smaller scale, but the same things are done, just it depends on the size of the company. And so from there, I moved on, stayed with dad until I was in my early 30s, and we were dealing with coal at McDuffie Coal Terminal, export coal coming down. It'd go overseas. Then the import coal from Drummond Coal came into Mobile, servicing the power plants. And that's where I feel like my career really took off, is that we were responsible to be that go-between. Drummond Coal owned the boats, and we were a management company for them, managing their assets. And I was exposed to all of their corporate, and then with Southern Company, all of their corporate. And I feel like I was blessed to be around a lot of people that invested in me. They shared their knowledge, they shared things with me. Um, my dad and his background helped inspire the business because of his relationship with Robert Caldwell. He and Robert were friends from the Ohio River days. And from there, I met Rob McCune. I give a lot of credit to my career to Rob McCune with Crounce Corporation. I was 16 years old, and I feel like he really showed me how to be a dispatcher. And moved on up, and an opportunity came up where Marquette had won the contract for the Southern Company plants, and they asked me if I would like to run that operation and start it up for them over here. So from there, I feel like I kind of catapulted myself from Mobile, Alabama, a little coal terminal, a little mom and pop operation, to one of the largest barge lines around. Um, it was really, really interesting to be able to be exposed to all of that. And that was at a time Marquette was really growing after the 2007. And they were really big and getting bigger. And it just helped to complement everything that I had already learned from my dad and from a mom and pop operation. I stayed with them for about 5 years. Um, After that, Parker Towing had acquired the boats my dad was managing, and dad had fully retired. And they asked me if I'd be interested in coming back to run my old operation. And I did. I did that for about 5 years and helped Parker to grow and expand from just coal coming from Birmingham South to moving to the East Canal, where they started tramp towing. After Parker, and had some good times there. Cooper Marine, Mr. Cooper, asked me if I would be interested in coming to work for him, and I basically gave this same speech to him. I gave him from the beginning to the end, and he asked me if I'd be interested in coming to work for them, and I did. And I'll tell you, I've had some of the best 6 years of my life here at Cooper. It's a really fun place to work. Um, so a lot of great people that I get to work with, and I've found where I've gravitated towards the technical side and helping them upgrade their system that we use. And I just each day is a challenge, but I get to kind of bounce around from different places. Some days I'm doing sales and logistics, some days I'm doing IT, some days I'm doing barge repair, and then some days I've got the whole thing on Christmas Day when everybody's taking off. So I just feel really blessed with the people that have invested in me since I was a little boy, to be able to do the things that I do on a day-to-day basis. Some people say, a job is a job, but I don't call it a job. I get to do what I like to do, and it's fun.
Yeah, I'm in a very similar position with my current role at Ingram. with these tanks. Um, do any stories come to mind from old river stories from your grandparents, your father, anything like that that's especially memorable that you may have heard as a child or even in later years?
Yeah, one sticks in my mind. Um, I think it was Dad's first trip working for Oil Gulf. I believe they were coming down with 30 or 35, and they made Vicksburg Bridge. And Dad was sweating pure bullets. He had the port captain on the boat with him doing his check ride. He says he lined up on Vicksburg Bridge. I think they wanted them to take 5 more than whatever they had. Dad didn't feel comfortable doing it. He and the port captain were sitting there. As I said, he was sweating pure bullets. But he said he made the Vicksburg Bridge. And after they got through and he wiped the sweat off of his brow, the port captain looked at him and said, "Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to come down with those extra 5 either." How does X amount of dollars, whatever they were paying back then? I'm guessing 40, 50, 100. But that one sticks out in my mind, his time making that Vicksburg Bridge with that tow. And I think Dad always got along with the seasoned veterans on the lower Mississippi River. Um, some really ironic stories that I get now is a little boy that grew up in Mobile, Alabama at McDuffie Coal Terminal on a mom and pop operation is now booking barges and finding cargo to bring back to all the places Dad went to on the boat. I never got my license, but I didn't want to be out there and be away from home. First off, knowing my dad, I probably wouldn't have got off very much. So I went to the office, and that pathway has provided me with the opportunity to see all of the stories for 46 years that Dad and I talked about. Shawneetown is the one big thing. Coal from Shawneetown down to New Orleans, then the Shotan boats bringing them across the Sound. Dad was the mule bringing them down the river, and it wasn't just my father. My uncles, my cousins, all in the marine industry. Uncle Bobby wound up. He used to run the Bun Shotan and the Paul Shotan. He says backing out of Pascagoula with 9 or 12 loads and going over to New Orleans. And then he wound up and ended up in the Noble ship pilots. His sons both ended up there. Bobby and Robbie have retired. David is still active in the ship pilots. Uh, Uncle Charlie and Uncle Lee William both ended up running for Marathon on the offshore tugs, running from Houston to Tampa and New York to Tampa. I can remember as a child getting to go over to buy a cassette in Pascagoula. Grandma would have a whole case of Winston cigarettes for Uncle Lee William. But every time they would come home, I always got something. They'd bring me a shotgun, or they'd bring me some candy, or always bringing me gifts. Didn't see them very much because they was all on the boat working. But every time they never forgot me. They always brought me something. So whenever we got to go to port and see them or the dock that they were at, it was always fun to go see them because I'm a little boy. I get to see all these big lights, these long boats. It was a lot of good memories.
Do you remember the first time you saw and or stepped on a vessel?
The first time, no, I mean, I was 3 when I first stepped on a boat. But after that, it would be a blur of maybe 5, 6, 7 years old on one of the Miss Marion or Sandy. Um, Captain Roger Sims or Fred Cleveland, the 2 main pilots that Dad had. I can't tell you how many times they let me get up there, steer the boat. Um, Once I got old enough to pick up a ratchet and a wire, they put me to work building tow. We go to the shipyard, and this is back in the 80s, and I'm in the fuel tank with a scraper, a hoe from the garden, and I'm scraping the sludge off of the fuel tanks. I come up for air. My eyes are about to pop out of my head, and Dad's pushing me back down. Dad, let me get a little air. No problem. He runs the air hose from the air compressor over to the vent. Here's your air, and I get back to work. Swinging engines. Oh, those Detroit 1271s. We swung engines about every 2 or 3 years, unless you swallowed a valve at some point. Various shipyards. But everywhere I went, Dad was taking me with him. So Big George and Little George. So whatever he got, everybody was always treating me like a prince, like royalty. The relationships that I built throughout my career is what I treasure the most. The David Norris, the Holly Normans, as I said, Rob McCune, Eddie Outlaws, all of the guys up at the Paducah River, Darren Adrian, Blake Denton. Those guys they just poured knowledge into me that you can't buy that today. And now I still feel like I'm that little boy that's eager to learn, but I look around and I see the next generation coming in. And I kind of get caught in a web here. Like I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to be learning, and there's supposed to be somebody ahead of me showing me the way. But I have to stop and turn around. I have to train the next generation. But I don't see myself there, but it's happening. But they weren't exposed to that. They didn't come off of boats. They're coming out of colleges. And so we have to take that college education and we have to translate it to the marine industry, which, as you know, can be totally different from any other industry that you've got. There's not many schools that teach what we have. In a lot of ways, it's passed down generation to generation on the boat. So I treasure the relationships from the old school guys. I speak more of their language than I do the new generation. In some ways, I kind of feel an honor to pass this information on. I just don't think it's my time yet. I'm still supposed to be out there, the one doing it. But I guess, Father Time's catching up with me, and it's time to start passing some things on.
Interestingly enough, fairly recently, just a matter of months, I'm 38 and hanging out with some guys from Cooper, Darrow and Convent and all that, and then met some customers a few weeks back. I very suddenly became the old man in the room.
Hmm.
Do you think over the years with the new personnel that is uh, more or less restructuring the industry to some degree, um, have you witnessed a disconnect between the office and the boats more so than 30, 40 years ago?
I do. I see that. I think there's a lot of value in having that connection with the pilots. I learned that the hard way when I had my dad, or Captain Steve Crowley. They were the pilots and they could speak to the pilots, and then all I had to do was really dispatch them. But they were the ones doing the heavy lifting, talking them through how they could make a petty boy pass or make a bend, high water, low water. Uh, they could do that. I heard all those stories, and even if I was right, there wasn't that connection until you have a license, till you run a boat. The pilots are a fraternity. They speak the same language. And I think that's where our major disconnect is, that we have a generation that is looking at this through optics of wanting to be more efficient, wanting to do better. But there are certain things that have changed on boats, and there are certain things that pilots can and can't do. 30 years ago, we didn't have subchapter M. We barely had AWORCP. If the engine went out, you still had another one, you come on in. Generator went down, you still had another one, you come on in. Um, High water, low water, fog. I think the old school guys just had a can-do attitude. Now, I don't think that the liability or the incidents were as maybe reported as they are today. I think there's more eyes on boats. There's certainly more bridges and locks and things that social media and cameras are eager to catch and crucify for whatever reason. And I think that the crews are phenomenal at what they do, to be able to take their boat and that cargo and that tonnage. I think they are phenomenal at what they do. But I think they hold back some because who's standing on the bridge with a camera going straight to Facebook Live, ready to watch him crash and burn, which is then going to cause him to lose his license or uh, get sued or whatever. So I think they are rightly so conservative in how they run their boat. And at the same time, as times have gone on with compliance, and again, this subchapter M, the manpower shortage that we have, a pilot or a captain in the wheelhouse of the boat has got so much paperwork that he has to do. He's got to train his deckhands that came on that don't know what they're doing. And he's got to try to make at least 100 miles a day to keep the office happy. Not to mention orders changing, engines blowing, sinks plugged up, air conditioners went out. I feel for them. I truly do. I feel for them. It's almost a no-win situation. And then back it up to there's no school for this. The C schools that give you the license, they're over and over and over after you've done 4 or 5 years on a boat. So it's not like University of Alabama's out there with pilot school to come in and teach you how to be a pilot. There's only a handful. Texas A&M, the Maritime Academy up in, I believe it's Maine. There's only a handful that you come out, but I don't know that any of them are specific to brown water barges. So we're at a industry that is passing this on to the next generation, and the next generation is not wanting to do that. They can go make a little less money, but plenty to live on, with a business degree, plumbing degree, a welding degree, and they're not away for 21 and 14 or 28 and 28. It's a really hard industry. And as I watched my family, the guys being away from the home, you might see the uncles or your dad 5 or 10 days out of the month. The rest of the time it was WLO radio until cell phones got on the boat. So it is a hard industry. I believe this disconnect that you speak of, I believe that it is there. I do know that in my company specifically, the Coopers are very good at hiring good, young, smart people, and they catch on really quick. So they take their skill set that they have. We have a few Marines. We've got some business degrees, some engineers. And I've sat back and I've watched the guys that I work with, and I try to compare, okay, I've got all this years of experience and he's got other experiences, and I'm sitting there watching them just like a sponge, just absorbing it up. And as they learn, yeah, then they are connecting, and they're doing it very well, and they're doing it to help further the advancement of the industry, the maritime industry, specifically for our company. And I think you can honestly agree with me on this. There's a lot of moving parts: boats, docks, crew changes, grocery orders, breakdowns in our job. And you and I just talked here just yesterday. You know, hey, I got a barge for here. Oh, hold up. Let me drop this one out of tow. Got to pick this one up. Got to do this. Oh, we're waiting weather, but the weather's going to pass. There's a lot of moving parts. And that's what I really find interesting and I like to analyze things. So I'm sitting there and I'm reading people and I'm like, wow, now this guy doesn't have half the years I've got, but in just a short period of time, with other colleagues that are very experienced, they catch on and they move forward. So, where I think there is a disconnect, if it is the right environment and the right people, overall, I believe they are advancing our industry to a more efficient, safer, and financially uh, making more money. So, where I see a disconnect, I will also say times are a changing, and it's always good to think outside the box. As and as long as you're not violating anything, bring something up. If we can make it work in our industry, we're all for it. So yes, there is a disconnect, but our guys are catching on really quick. And I would say that probably the same thing goes on with your organization and a lot of the others. You've got enough old heads in there that can take the disconnect and build that bridge, and they will be the next generation. We will be the next generation. So yeah, there's a disconnect, but I see some connections and some bridges that pave the way for a better future.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope to be a part of that for this organization I'm working with. Question came to mind as you were speaking. Over the last 3 decades or so, of course, HR, compliance, safety, government agencies, sub-M, all that has come into play. Um, Obviously well intended. Um, do you see where those policies have made it more challenging to do the job on the boats and on and shoreside?
I do. I see where it's challenging, but then I also remember the Amtrak wreck here in Mobile, Bayou Canot, when when the Mauvilla hit the CSX bridge. Back then, there wasn't any radar endorsements. I think that was one of the incidents that inspired radar endorsements. Um, we have to have that. Have we gone overboard? I wouldn't say we've gone overboard. I'd say we're just catching up with the times. There has to be checks and balances here for overall safety. A lot of people lost their lives in that Amtrak wreck. I was a little boy, and Dad and the Sandee and a midstream fuel barge went up there to pump it off. And I remember asking him, can I go up there with you? And he said, no, not this time, son. Well, why not, Dad? Son, there's death up there. And even though I didn't get to go, that still made a mark on me. It makes it more challenging, but we have to have it. We're pushing anywhere from 1 to 50 plus barges on various boats under bridges that human lives are traveling over. We're we're tying up to docks where tankermen are there to pump off, pump on. We're meeting other boats that have human life on them. We have to have rules in place, compliance, continuously doing this over and over so that it's life, so that we can protect our boat, our barge, protect the people that are around us. There's a shortage, I believe, in the marine industry, deckhands being one of them. Not everybody's cut out to be a deckhand, be away from home, or work a 12-hour shift on days and nights.
Well, sir, I do think that's as good a place to stop as any, bud. Did you have anything else to add here today?
No, sir.
Well, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. We'll keep in touch on things.
All right, buddy.
Thanks. This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.